I like Jason's hair the best. Wait, do we look at the camera or do we look at each other?
You can look wherever you want.
All right, I'm gonna look wherever I want.
We're live.
Kidding.
Jelly Bean is here. Hi, Jelly.
Jelly Bean, I know.
Jelly's Jelly's a friend.
Oh, I see. If we click the comments.
Yeah, well, welcome, first of all. I gave these guys no instructions whatsoever. So sorry, Jason. The private chat is where we can talk to just ourselves, and the comments are where everything. Bean, are you the administrator? Lynn, do you have a question? We are here. We are live. Welcome, everyone, to this is our, let's see, what is today? It's Tuesday, the 22nd. Hey, Deirdre. It's 7:03 p.m. Get started just a touch late. As always, we like to give people a little time to get in and get situated, grab a comfortable seat, and grab a snack. They are all free. We have a really exciting and first time. Okay, Lynn, well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. So as always, I like to encourage everyone to say hello and let us know where you're from so we know you're out there. So, hey, Dave, it's good to see you. Aaron, hi, Aaron in Arizona. Again, Lynn, where are you from? Are they frozen for you? Jelly, are you having, hi, Katie. Yvonne is here. Everything is populating nicely. We'll give it another 35 or 40 seconds just to let people get in the room and get comfortable. Hey, Rochelle, it's been a long time. How are you? Sally's here from Minneapolis. We got a great group here. So this is a very personal stream for me. So if you've seen my story or heard my story or want to know more about my story, then this is definitely the place to be for the next hour and a half. We will get started in probably 20 seconds. Please keep saying hello and let us know you're here. This is the part where I pretend to be really busy.
You look busy.
I'm very busy doing important things. Don't bother me.
Sorry.
Yes. South Louisiana. Where Maryland and South Louisiana. Keen for this group. Martin in Australia. Hello, Martin. Bellingham, Washington. Sean Shinnick at Draw Your Monster on Instagram is here. The man, the myth, the artistic legend. Please go check him out. In fact, Jess, when you get a chance, we'll put a link to Sean's social medias. Jelly Bean says, hi, Dr. Moritz.
Hi, Jelly Bean.
So, all right. So with that, we're a little bit over. Let's get started. I'm very excited about tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. This is definitely a personal one for me. And it'll probably get emotional. Baton Rouge, very cool. So let me just quickly get through some housekeeping, and then we can jump right into introducing these folks and telling you how they're related to me and what we all have to do with each other, other than our dashing good looks. So this is our first in our new series, Turning Points, where we focus on an individual with OCD that it was extremely sick with OCD over a long period of time and then got better. For a variety of reasons, and looking at those cases and potential why they got better and what changed and what they did, and really examining it from two perspectives, the individual's perspective and their treatment team's perspective. So welcome to Volume 1. My name is Ethan. I'm the National Advocate for the International OCD Foundation, which you all probably know, which simply means I have OCD and I like to talk about it way, way, way too much. But it's going to happen again tonight. So hi, Deirdre. I heart you too, for sure. Okay, so this town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to check with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. We always want to be respectful and kind of others. This is a safe space, although we are live on social media and it will be recorded and live on social media. So we always want to be cognizant of that fact. And know that it will be there. So if you have questions, which we will be opening it up for questions in about 30 to 45 minutes, so get them ready. But always be aware of that fact, but we like to keep it as safe and as supportive as possible and be as honest and candid as raw as possible. So with that, I'm excited to introduce this fine group of people to you. First off, we have Dr. Katja Moritz to my I never know what side she's on for you guys, but she's next to me. So Dr. Katia Moritz is a licensed psychologist in Florida, New York, Utah, and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Dr. Moritz is board certified in cognitive behavioral psychology and a fellow of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. Together with Dr. Jonathan Hoffman, she founded the NBI Ranch and the Neurobehavioral Institute, where she is the chief clinical officer. Dr. Moritz is the training director and supervisor of NBI's APICC-approved postdoctoral training program. Dr. Moritz specializes in the treatment of severe anxiety, obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, and autism spectrum disorder. Her work focuses on complex and hard-to-diagnose patients and training and interventions for families. She is on the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board and the Diversity Council of the International OCD Foundation, Compulsive Disorder Foundation. She is also on the advisory board for the HAAPE, Helping Adults with Autism Perform and Excel. Dr. Moritz is the author of Working with Obsessive Compulsive Disorder in Children, video and training program, Forms for Helping Children with OCD, and Blink, Blink, Clop, Clop, and OCD Storybook, English and Spanish version. So basically, she has nothing going on. Hi, Katia.
Hi, Ethan.
Dr. Moritz, you're getting some love from Jelly Bean. Dr. Moritz said to me before we got on, she says, now, is anything off limits? I mean, that you don't want me to talk about? And I immediately got nervous. Like, she just knows how to trigger me instantly. It's unbelievable. After 10 years of working with her, it's been 10 years since I've worked with her, and she immediately made me anxious. So you have not lost your touch.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next up, we have Nate Gruner. He's the dashing redhead in the corner. Nate received his MSW from Boston College Graduate School of Social Work. He completed you're not a doctor? Oh, God.
He doesn't have to be one. He's better than everyone who is a doctor.
Okay. I got nervous for a second. All this time.
Still getting the love.
All this time. He completed a postgraduate fellowship at McLean Hospital's OCD Institute and is currently working there as a staff behavioral therapist. Nate has a particular interest in increasing the effectiveness of psychological treatments for OCD and related disorders. He received the McLean Hospital Career Development Fellowship Grant. You need to work on a shorter title, but congratulations, to fund a research study examining acceptance and commitment therapy, enhanced exposure therapy for OCD. In addition to his research and clinical work, Nate serves as a founding member of the board of directors for the New England chapter of the Association for Contextual Behavioral Sciences. I give him a lot of crap. He's an amazing man and played a major role in my recovery. Welcome, Nate.
Thanks, Ethan.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Jason Elias. Jason was the director of psychological services and clinical research at the OCD Institute at McLean for many years, where he maintains an appointment as lecturer with the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. In 2018, he left the OCDI to form CB Team, a private practice in Arlington, Massachusetts, specializing in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. So thank you, Jason, for being here.
Thanks, Ethan.
Absolutely. So I kid with them, but the amount of love and compassion I have for these folks is you can't, I don't know, you can't explain it in words. Yeah, no words. So how, and Deirdre says, hi, Dr. Elias, as everyone says hello. New to live chats from Kansas. So Carla, thank you so much for being here. So what do all these individuals have in common? Well, on my quest to get OCD under control and managed, during the period of time that I talk about from when I first found exposure response prevention treatment at the age of 32, all the way through to moving to Los Angeles and all that time in between, it's always reversed, whatever. This is my treatment team. These are the folks that worked tirelessly on my behalf. They advocated for me. I made them absolutely crazy. And they worked tirelessly, oftentimes at their own health and well-being to get me better. And in fact, I'll cry because it's whatever. They definitely, they didn't give up on me when I quickly gave up on myself after trying to figure out why I couldn't figure out why treatment worked and why ERP didn't work and treatment wouldn't work. And I couldn't figure it out and I couldn't flip the switch and I couldn't get better. And I tried everything. And these guys, the only reason I'm a national advocate and I'm where I am and I want to give back is because of these three human beings in my life now. This treatment team. And I do have a therapist now. She's not on right now, but she's amazing as well. So Michelle, shout out to you. Thank you for treatment today. Had therapy today. But these three folks right here were instrumental in my learning about OCD and my education, my therapy, and my eventual wellness and long-term success with managing OCD. And 10 years, knock wood, I have not had a relapse. Doesn't mean I don't struggle. We talk about that all the time, but I have been managing OCD for the last 10 years. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about my story, but I really want you guys to be able to ask questions of the team, as well as give you some insight into my story and what was happening on the other side, because all you hear is that, I went here, I went there, I went through this, I went through that. So what was happening? What did they do to kind of bring me from this really dark place out of it and to the place that I'm at now? So start thinking about questions. But first, I want to give everybody an opportunity to say hello. So Katya, let's start with you. How are you? Any initial thoughts?
I know this is really nice. I'm really happy. So Jason and Nate are dear, dear colleagues, and I miss seeing them and working with them. So this is exciting for me. I'm glad we've collaborated in a lot of cases, and Ethan being one of them, right? That we've worked together and kind of show that OCD treatment is about putting a village together to help the patients and supporting each other during treatment, no matter where we are and in what position we're in the world, or in the hospital, or what we're doing. We have to get together and help each other, because OCD is really, really difficult to treat. And I think that the story is about you, Ethan. You are the hero of the story, without a doubt. We are just like kind of your tow trucks for a little while. But what's so interesting about it is that we took a different approach, which was, instead of kind of like throwing the hot potato around, we held the hot potato together, and the hot potato cooled, and the hot potato actually flourished and became this really beautiful person that you are now. And I think that is just that to show that we have to plan and treat OCD very differently than we had in the past. And I'm here to advocate for the model of collaboration. So I think this is pretty cool.
Thank you, Katya. I always want to remind everyone to please ask questions. I will go in order, but if you want to go ahead and load them in the comments, you have questions for Katya, Nate, or Jason. If you're familiar with my story, if you're not, and you want me to elaborate on something, please just ask away. And there's no topic here off topic. I'm sure Katya will bring up something that'll make me nervous. Anyway, so we'll go in order of when I met these folks. So next is Dr. Elias. Any initial thoughts?
I really like what Katya said, because at the time I was how long ago? 10 years ago, you said?
10 years ago.
It's been a little while. So I remember Katya's dedication to you and her advocacy for you. I mean, she was talking to me about you before I met you, I believe, before you actually came to Massachusetts. And I loved that. I mean, I felt like I already was trying to develop different style of therapy than I had learned in graduate school. That was just very formal, and there wasn't a lot of personality, injected into it, which I still train young clinicians that way, to be kind of more reserved and more careful about things. And then to have Katya calling me, I still remember it being in my apartment late at night, talking to her on the phone about you, because I was worried about how you were doing. And she was there, like, basically doing distress tolerance for me about the case. And then Nate was so helpful because he was helping you with distress tolerance. And we really did hold all of that together, all of us. And that's what it took. And it was a really valuable lesson. And it felt like I was allowed to try harder with you than anyone else, because Katya gave me that inspiration and encouragement to just absolutely go for it. And it turned out to require a lot of us. I mean, I definitely was the weak link in the chain, I think. And you're lucky to have made it through. I'm just teasing, of course. But seriously, I think we all brought different skills to it. And so I was just happy and honored to be a part of the journey.
Well, it's so interesting because each of you had a completely different style of treatment. Hey, Selwyn in Australia, a couple Australians here tonight. You each had such completely different tactics. I mean, I don't think Jason and Katya's tactics for treatment could not have been more different.
Yes.
And both were equally as effective in different ways. But let me give Nate a moment to speak here. So Nate, for those of you, Nate came a little bit later in my journey. After I got kicked out of the OCDI, and I can tell a little bit about that story for compulsing in a big way. And I started to cry earlier because I said, these folks didn't give up on me. This was a place where I was at a point where I was pretty much about to give up on myself, just because, I'd already done 8 months of treatment and 2.5 months of residential, and like, what was it going to take? What did I have to do? Nate entered the picture, and I had seen Nate for the 2.5 months, like floating around the OCDI, and he's a bit of a magician and a wizard with you'll see when he talks, because he's kind of very specific with his hands. That he'd made a good magician. Anyway, Nate, what is your perception? Any initial words?
I remember Jason pulling me aside at the beginning and asking if I would help him. I think you probably felt overwhelmed, Jason, which is how I felt working with you too, Ethan. I felt very out of my league at first. And it was funny, I took a crisis call from a patient the other night, and I thought of you because I thought about this talk, just how I learned so much working with you about what works and what doesn't. And I think that's one of the things that Katya and Jason and I have, is like working with people like you and people at the OCD clinics where we work. It just like, we know that people don't respond to traditional treatments all the time, and we have to try creative things. So I'm really excited to talk about that tonight, what we tried with you that worked and didn't work. But yeah, it was a really meaningful experience, and I grew a lot as a clinician in the years that I worked with you.
Well, thank you, Nate. And Wolfie, I see your question. We will definitely get to it. Katya, is it time to let them know the truth? That I really don't have OCD. We were hired to train them.
It was all an act, guys.
Surprise!
It was just a role, and that reminds me. I have a lot of Ethan stories to tell. Like I could actually spend a few hours here telling you guys some funny stories about Ethan. But it's all fake news. He just pretended to have a problem, but he actually was just an act. He was just trying to get a new role, and he used all of us as his like kind of lab, so here we are 10 years later, and we still believe it.
So I want to take everyone back to the beginning, because again, everyone who's watching right now, I want to give you an opportunity to see the full picture. But not only that, I want you an opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Moritz, Nate, and Jason. I mean, I've had, at this point, hundreds of people on these town halls, and they're all equally brilliant. But these guys are some of the finest people that I know of. And that when everyone struggles to find treatment and therapy and good therapists and people that care, it was important to bring this group together because I wanted people to see that not only help is out there and effective quality treatment is out there, but individuals and therapists that care and that patients matter to them are out there. And at least in my case, these are those three. So I want to start at the beginning, and I encourage anyone to ask questions as we go, because I want to keep this as experiential as possible. So I'm not going to dive too deep in my story, but born with OCD, struggled, got worse. My world started getting smaller and smaller. When I was 0 to 10, it was what I call traditional OCD, counting, symmetry, and some staring and things like that. As I got older, it became, fear of illness, hypochondriasis, it was called at the time, be health anxiety now. And then, it got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. In my 20s, I was acting, as many of you know, but I was unable to go out to LA. I was unable to leave my mom's side because I was scared of being separated from her, until everything came crashing down at about 31, when I became completely bedridden, unable to function, lost 100 pounds. And this whole time I'd been diagnosed with OCD at around 14 and sought out treatment, and had been to, up till the point where I met Dr. Moritz, had been to 10 different psychologists, never did ERP, never heard of ERP, just did psychodynamic talk therapy. And each time just got less hopeful and less hopeful, because everybody promised that they could help me and they didn't. And so why would I believe the next person? And also I see a medication question. We will get to your question, so hang tight. I'd been on every medication possible by this point, every SSRI and otherwise. And so at this point, I was very hopeless. So I want to show some video in a second, but before I do, so when I first saw Dr. Moritz, I had just gotten out of a acute psychiatric hospital for the first time because my OCD was so bad. It was hard for me to even see reality to a certain extent. What was your observation when you first met me? I remember being there with my parents that first time, and you and Dr. Hall. What did you see when you saw me? You're on mute, Katya.
You look like the caveman. Your hair was disheveled. Your nails were very, very long. You look like you've been hiding under a rock for a few months. You look like a very, very severe psychiatric patient, and that we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know, OCD gets so bad that you need to figure out what you're dealing with. Is this just plain OCD? Do we have other things going on here? But as you start telling the story, it became pretty obvious that you had very severe debilitating OCD, and we needed to figure out how to help you.
When I first talked to you, or when they talked, did you sit there and look at me and go, "We can't help this guy. He cannot be helped or fixed." Or fixed is not the right word.
I don't think I've ever felt this way about a human being in my life. I think that everyone can get better and be helped. I felt that, is it going to be a big challenge, and is it easier not to? Is it easier to pass you along to this place or that place? Maybe, but I felt like every human being deserves a chance of getting better. Every human being deserves all our attention, our dedication. And if we had the capability, that would have been the case for everyone that has some suffering, some pain, right? In that case, I don't know how to fix other types of pain, but I felt pretty comfortable that I understood your OCD pretty well, and that if you bought into what we were trying to do and you went through the pain of treatment, that the pain you were feeling was going to be much less than the pain that we're going to induce for you to get better. So I needed to kind of allow you to see that, and have a little reliance on our eyes and our expertise. So I felt like there was so much to do, and it felt really exciting to have a challenge. I mean, you were, one of those that we live for, is someone that has everything in there to become, an extraordinary human being, a kind person, someone that could right now do what you do, but couldn't because OCD had robbed you from your life. And so a good fight against OCD is pretty cool. So you were just the carrier of the condition. So I thought it was pretty exciting, actually, that you were, there. So I felt pretty good. I actually felt that we could do it.
Yeah, that made one of us. I just remember you saying we can help you, and I was like, bullshit. No, you can't. Nobody has been able to. So we actually have some video queued up. It is from my keynote. So this piece of video was actually the very first time, actually the second time I did ERP with Dr. Moritz. She had just got me a haircut and a shave, and this is what it looked like at the very, very beginning, early on. Jess, did you share sound by chance? Jess, did you share sound when you shared? Oh, wow.
Pretty powerful even without the sound.
Oh, it's not working. Oh, yeah, it wasn't working. I couldn't hear the sound. That's okay. Sorry, I was talking through it. I apologize. So yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. So no problem. No problem at all. So that's what, yes, you will be able to see it later, Deirdre. It will be recorded. You just played the clip I'm referring to. Yeah. So the reason I put that in my keynote, and the reason I wanted to show it now, the reason it's out there was more powerful without the sound. Oh no, is that that's what OCD looks like for so many people, and I don't think you see that often in the media and in the and the spotlight. You don't see that in the way it's portrayed, obviously in Hollywood, or you don't see that kind of pain and suffering and discomfort. And so I remember when Dr. Mitz was shooting that, and in the video I'm saying, don't shoot me, don't film me, which I was an actor, so I that's the first time I ever said that. She said you'll be glad you have this one day, and I remember her sending me. She sent me a FedEx hard copy when I just moved out to Los Angeles of this, and I kept it in a very special drawer. And since then, it's been one of the most remarkable tools I've had during this process. So was ERP challenging with me?
I think that it wasn't any more challenging than it's supposed to be based on the kind of OCD that you're presenting with, right? So I think that, the treatment had to match the heightened level of OCD that you had, and also the neurobiology of OCD. You really are trying to do brain surgery without opening the brain. So it's happening in the brain for real. This is no joke. And so to get to the layers of the brain and the changes we need to make, it really, you're going into it. And so, with you, Ethan, I think the idea was that you were not asking us, your OCD was telling us, don't do this, don't do that. And we were trying to help you at that time realize that you're listening to your OCD, right? So we actually, someone on the chat asked, how do you know, like Ethan say, stop. Why? When do you know how far you're going? And do you, is it mean, right? I think to me is the same kind of analogy of someone having, doing heart surgery and saying that you feel like a truck hit you after. Do you feel bad for the patient? You feel compassion for the pain, but you were excited that that person is going to have a life worth living once their heart is better. So to me, it's no different than surgery, right? It sounds a little cruel, but the reality is that in order to get there, sometimes, yes, you cried anyway. I'm sorry to say that, Ethan, you cried all the time, and you cried anyway for hours and hours and hours. So to me, it was like, if you're crying for a reason and that is going to make you better, the crying for me wasn't really going to deter me from fighting. So actually for the clinician is actually learning to deal with your own distress, okay? Because you have the empathy, you are compassionate, but you have to think about it. This person is not going to have a life. So you rather them cry now and have a life, or feel really good and be really understood and feel really cozy and have this tremendous, kind of progression of an illness. So the idea was like, this is super serious. We have to bring the big guns. Let's put the pressure on the brain. So the pressure was not on you. You were just the house of OCD, and we're putting pressure on your brain.
Yeah, it definitely felt like that. It's, I just remember, and again, if you're just joining us or you're here, please load comments in the questions. Or questions in the comment thread. We will be getting to questions in the next 15 minutes. I do want to give Jason and Nate obviously plenty of time to talk as well. So I don't want to stay. We could literally stay on each person for 3 hours. I just remember they had a children's room at NBI at the clinic in Florida where they had bears and toys, and for people that siblings or kids that were there for treatment. And she stuck me in there when I was crying and said I couldn't leave. And I just remember being in there crying the whole time. And I was kind of crying, but then she would walk by and I'd really up the crying so she would hear. All I wanted was a hug. And she wouldn't give me a hug. No matter what she would do, she would not give me a hug. And I just remember somebody leaving her office and she hugged them and they were upset. And I was like, what the hell? She just hugged this person. She's not going to hug. You wouldn't give me a hug when I cried. And it just started.
I remember Katya like warning me about the force of your personality, that it was one of your greatest strengths, but it also was keeping you from getting treatment. You would do tap dances for me and keep me entertained and try to keep us off topic. And so before we ever met, I was prepared to try to keep us on track.
So that's a great segue. And I love hearing
I have a follow-up question though for Katya, because I wondered, I don't think I've ever asked you before, did Ethan show up to your sessions with that personality, like sounding like he wanted what you were offering? Or was he trying to like wiggle out of it or refuse it?
Yeah, no, I think he was trying to convince that we're doing the wrong thing. So he would try to convince, like, more like his OCD was advocating as opposed to Ethan. Ethan now is an advocate. Before, his OCD was the advocate. And so OCD would advocate, like, you can't do this to me. You're being so mean. I can't believe you're doing this to me. And I call Ethan we used to call him a carpet swimmer, because he would like lay on the floor and scream and cry and cry. And, he was trying to say, hey, get tired of this, exhaust you, and then you like give in, right? Because you're like, you don't want to have to deal with that. Like, this is a full-grown man crying, screaming, and you feel badly, but you're like, okay, this behavior is not going to win. So we had to take a very behavioral approach on, when you regulate yourself, when you're doing the right things, you do get the reward, you do get the attention, you do get the connection. And I think that his OCD realized that there's no room for this anymore. So little by little, the crying would stop, right? And then, and over time, you could see the emotional regulation with some skills and some, conversations we had about how important that was going to be for his recovery. Ethan was very motivated. His life was really getting to a point that was so unmanageable that I feel like all of a sudden he's like, all right, I need to do something here, right? So I think he was very charming, and he's funny as funny could be, and he would give everyone at the clinic nicknames. He actually perceives everything that is going on in the funniest ways ever, so he can make you laugh hysterically. I mean, you have to listen to Ethan improv a song. I never had laughed this hard in my life when he got the kids together at the camp in Utah, and they actually did a battle of songs, and Ethan composed this, the funniest thing I've ever. I literally thought I was going to fall over. He is hysterical, but when his ability was kidnapped by OCD and he's trying to use that to kind of sabotage the process, which is the right thing that happens in treatment, it was really difficult. So we had to outsmart. It felt like playing chess. Mm-hmm. Every move he made, we have to think about the move, and our team has to sit down and keep each other in check, so we wouldn't get like kind of like dissuaded or really diluted because of Ethan's capabilities and personality, right?
And I just want to speak to, individuals that are watching. It's like, from my perspective during that time, and by the time I reached there, it wasn't a game to me. I wasn't trying to pull one over. I believed OCD. And I did not believe them. And I believed wholeheartedly that if they didn't listen to me, but it was OCD, that I was going to die, because that was my fear, that I was going to die from a head injury or accidentally kill myself. And these individuals especially felt like the most irresponsible people in my life. I couldn't figure out why my parents trusted them. I couldn't figure out why they were even in business. And I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that it worked. And I think that's at a certain point why I actually would come back or try or think I was trying, but I was certain that I would die from OCD. I was certain that it wasn't going to work. I was certain that my case was different than everybody else's, that nobody else was like me. And I didn't feel more, I felt more like that. So we'll transition to when I went to the OCDI and first met Dr. Elias. And I went to and Dr. Moritz will tell you, like, they were preparing me for residential all along. I didn't even know that. I just thought I was going to get better. And why did I need to go to residential? I mean, obviously I was sick when I got to residential. I was convinced I was going to be there 2 weeks and I knew everything already. But why was it so important that I go to residential?
Is that for me or Katya?
Either one.
Anybody.
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, Katya knows best of all because she was working with you before residential. But you were just very hard to contain. It's hard to spend enough time with you to get you back from the OCD. And I feel like nobody really gets a break from their OCD, but there are some cases where if you're not in the presence of a trigger, you might get a little bit of a break. But things had developed to the point where you thought you were going to smack yourself in the head And so you really couldn't get away from your triggers at all. When that's the case, residential is great because, it's literally all day long, not necessarily, it's not exposure all day long, but it's people and interaction and reasons to be out of your head. And if we saw you sort of stuck in your head, trying to pull you out. But I mean, sounds like you did very intensive work at NBI also.
Wait. So I think one of the points, Ethan, was that at that time you had such severe separation anxiety from your family. It actually was an impediment to treatment, right? So we needed to actually take you out of the family structure to put you in a place where you're all alone and you felt all the fears and you experienced everything. And then you had to focus on yourself, right? And so it was a process for your family and for you. So family therapy in your case, as you know, was crucial, and preparing your parents to support you in the right way instead of enabling, really supporting you in the process was key to your treatment. So you had to come out, you had to get out of that environment. You had to get out of your house. You had to be away from your parents to be able to then really look at your symptoms. And actually, you had the skills, but like you said, your overvalue ideation was so high. You so believed that you were going to die from, your brain bleeds and stuff, that you needed to get out and have to take that leap of faith and be somewhere else that is less safe. So we thought, like, hey, get him out somewhere and make, I remember taking you to the airport, me and your dad, remember? Because it was so hard for you to even consider going to the airport to travel, because at that time you didn't do anything without them. They drove you, they did everything with you, right? So that was your first, emerging adult moment where you now have to emerge as an adult with a serious neurobiological condition, and now you had to own it. So that was a very big strategy in your treatment.
And I am keeping aware of the time, guys. We will get to questions, I promise. The reason I want to touch on this, though, is like anybody out there that's struggling, that's been struggling, that questions getting help, that questions getting therapy, that questions that therapy is successful, or that even they have a shot at a meaningful life. I've always said I do this because I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through, that if I can get better, you can too. And so I want to continue to talk about this because I want you to see that there is a path. And you may not see the path in the moment, but you will find it and you can get there, and we're here to support you on that path as well. So I want to continue discussing, but we will get to questions, I promise. So Jason, so when I first got to treatment, to your point, and I'm glad you brought it up, is I felt triggered all the time because at any moment I thought I was not in control of my hands or my arms, and that I thought I was going to just start beating myself up and causing bleeds. And so I remember sitting in group at the end where we did inventory, and people would talk about their distress and SUDS and rate them on a scale and their anxiety levels and everything like that. And I just remember everybody, talking about, well, when I was doing ERP, I was in an 8 or a 9, I think it's on a scale of 100 now, but I was this high, but since then I've come way down. And I just remember sitting there every night, my legs bouncing up and down. I was completely tunnel vision into, which I don't know why I remember things so well for being not tuned in. It's very weird to me that anyway. So, and I just remember, like, I can't relate to anyone here because they're all talking about being triggered during an ERP and then coming down afterwards. And all I knew was I felt at an 8 or a 9 or a 10 all the time. And therefore, in my mind, I was completely different than anybody else here, and I couldn't be helped. I made that decision the first night I got there. Like, nobody has what I have. Everybody's down. What did you perceive or take away? Because you brought that up, and I think that's really interesting. Like, I was like, well, I'm triggered all the time. So my OCD is way worse than everybody else's. Nobody has even close to what I have. So there's no way that this is going to work for me.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a little note to myself after you said, like, how can I remember this stuff when I was so lost in my OCD? And it just reminded me to make a point that people are multitasking all the time when they have OCD. And there are clearly times when people are almost like frozen in thought, reviewing something, and you can tell they're really stuck. But it's a skill you developed to be able to have conversations and still keep track of your health at the same time. So I'm actually not surprised that you were able to pay attention, even though you were still caught up in it. It was like every decision you made was based on what was going on up here with the OCD. But you could come across as, very warm, engaging, funny, high functioning, things. You could make things look like they were going a lot better than they were. And when we got past that, it was a weird phase, because it was almost like trying to find the OCD at first, and then it just was raging. And I remember it felt like a switch where, Ethan would be gone and you would be on the floor crying, would be like the most dramatic version of that. And I remember fairly early on that we put Ethan in a room way down the hall. And so he didn't get a lot of foot traffic, where if he was, closer to the middle of the hallway or closer to the nursing station, there would have been people, passing by to see his distress. And it was all real. Yeah, it was all, in a way, real distress. But there was a way of displaying it that was like a mask. It was like, please help me and don't make me do this, was what you were trying to show us. And so we couldn't get to the real distress in the beginning. But yeah, he was at the end of the hallway and would be laying in his room on the floor crying. And without enough foot traffic, he inched his way to the doorway, so that, there'd be like a leg sticking out into the hall, so that you'd see this and you'd think, I got to go check on him. And so some of the plans we had in place for the staff included, when you see Ethan laying on the floor crying, you have to just walk by him and you have to step over him. And that was a real challenge in the treatment community, because it looked like we were neglecting this poor guy and not helping him do anything. And so his treatment was extremely public at the OCDI. And to some degree, you're on the unit together, so you get to know each other, but your treatment is still private. You're not really aware of what's going on with people. But Ethan kept making his more and more sort of elaborate, so that you couldn't ignore him. And so our challenge was to ignore him as he escalated.
And some stories, and I appreciate you guys being patient. Again, we will get to questions. Some story I didn't know half the stuff. So some stories that I never talk about was a lot of people, if you know my story, know about the snowbank and me faking an accident and what ultimately caused me to get kicked out of the OCDI. Enter Nate. Thank you for being patient, Nate. Sorry. He's the finale, if you're wondering. But a story that you don't know is very, very early on in this. I wanted to get to a hospital to see if I had a bleed. So I faked an accident in my room, which I don't ever talk. I don't know that I've ever told the story. And I wonder if Jason remembers. I'm sure you do, or maybe you don't. But I faked an accident in my room where I sort of kind of cut my head, and then I made myself throw up in my room, and then I laid there next to my puddle, and my roommate found me on the floor, passed out, and he got one of the counselors. And the counselor came and got me, like, wake up, Ethan. Apparently you notified them of it. I was I was sure I would get them with this. Like, I was sure no one was a match for me. And they got you on the phone. Do you remember that?
Yes, I think it was Rachel that called me. I'm not sure.
And they got me to my bed, and I was like, oh, and I was laying on the phone, and they got you on the phone. You're like, Ethan, you got to stop, man. You got to just chill out, relax. And that was like, I've never told that story, but like, that was just I remember that, like, that was 3 or 4 days into this thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you're very, very convincing. I mean, it's like method acting. And so Katya deserves so much credit for helping us understand what was going on, because you think, well, someone like Ethan, who's like putting on these theatrics, could also have hit his head. Like it was scary to just keep choosing the direction of, this is OCD, this is Ethan trying to get help, but not the right kind of help, and we have to stay the course. And there's nobody better at sort of rooting that out than Katya, and using leverage to help people do what they need to do to get better.
What was your go ahead, Katya.
Well, there was a history, right? So
Yep.
there was a flying printer that flew from a shelf into his head. There were like so many
They did make a
different
flying
things that
printer. It didn't
happened.
last long on the
Right.
shelf.
Right,
It was just
the
real.
flying printer. There was so many things, and a funny story that comes to mind is coincidentally my youngest son's name is Ethan also, and it's a funny story because it's Sunday, and I literally talked to Ethan probably 20 times over the weekend to get him through the weekend. That's the other reason why he had to go to residential, is because like I was hoping to have one weekend off. But Ethan needed support, so I was walking on Best Buy, and my husband had my son. My son was little at the time; he was maybe 5 years old or something, and Ethan was trying to get to the hospital because the flying printer jumped from a shelf and hit him in the head.
It's a true story. I've never denied it.
He had a concussion and he had to go in the hospital. And I am saying, Ethan, if you do this, then that, Ethan. I am saying, Ethan. And my son kept turning around and saying, what? And he's walking in front. And I'm trying to stay behind. And I'm, Ethan, listen, you need to blah, blah, blah. Ethan, stop, listen, Ethan. So a few minutes later, someone tugs on my pants, and I look up. They looks up at me, and I look down as my son Ethan, and he says, "Mom, I think you're being a little too harsh on Ethan." so I think that he realized that I was in a way trying to guide Ethan to not go to the hospital, and contingencies for Ethan was really hard, and a little bit you have to at that point not try to please the person, but actually help the person. So it was funny that the little guy, a 5-year-old, realized that I wasn't bailing Ethan out. So.
Well, I have to say that the contrast between Dr. Maritz's approach and Dr. Elias's approach they could not be more opposite. Dr. Maritz literally stabbed me in the face with a fork to try to get. I think, and I think I asked the other doctor there if she was like HIPAA compliant and she should do a background check on her. I was convinced that she was like rogue. But I remember one of our first sessions was you took me to sign up for racquetball at the club down the street. Like it was freezing out.
Yes, yes, we traipsed through like probably 1.5 feet of snow to get through that. We like to cut through. Yeah, we walked over to Waverly Oaks. I remember that.
And I couldn't figure out what you were doing. Like, it kind of reminded me of play therapy, but I was like, you were so passive, but real, but authentic. And like, I could relate to you, and I felt like you were a friend and somebody I could trust, but it was just such a different dynamic with you. And I didn't really know what to make of you, but I also thought that because of that, I could manipulate you more, at the same time. But I always knew you had my best interest at heart. What was your game plan moving forward with me, especially if you saw me progress through the process?
At the OCDI?
Yeah.
Before you left the OCDI?
During.
Yeah. It's really hard to remember. I mean, I remember connecting with you, and I remember trying to shake things up a lot. I remember thinking we were making more progress than we were, and I think probably even before the big incident that you pulled, I think we knew it was. I can't remember the timeline perfectly, but Katya and I were talking a lot, and she was joining meetings with us sometimes, and was very involved. And I think our conversations were probably already thinking about what's the next thing, because he's not really doing what he needs to do. You were doing just enough to keep us sort of to look like you were a part of the program. Like we wouldn't have kicked you out for refusing treatment, because you weren't refusing, you were doing some stuff for sure. And I think being in that community was helping you a tremendous amount, because you had so many people around you and peers, and there was some pride, I think, about how you were presenting yourself, that it helped you to pull things together. But somewhere along the way, I think we knew that you weren't progressing, and we had these battles, right? Like like you tell the story that I always want to, when I see the video, I want to jump in with an amendment about whenever you said I said I was going to call security and they had shotguns or something like that. But that's when we were really like pushing, and then the sort of like the wheels came off and you started falling apart and pulled that maneuver so that you could hopefully get an MRI, I think was what you were hoping for.
So what Jason's referring to is as 2.5 months. It was literally the day after New Year's. It was January 2nd. And I had gone out the night before with a bunch of people from the OCDI. We were allowed to go out after midnight, and we went to downtown Boston and walked on ice and all kinds of stuff. And the next day, Dr. Elias made me do an ERP where I had to hit my head. He hit his head first, and then I hit my head. I wouldn't do it. That's what he was referring to. And I was crying, and he said he was going to call security on me, and I finally did it. And then he said to go get a haircut. And long story short, I was so convinced that I had hurt myself. I faked an accident and ended up at the hospital, convinced the EMT, got picked up by 911, convinced the EMTs that a brain injury or head injury, and got my CAT scan. I was fine. And then I went back to the OCDI. Great. Literally as if nothing happened. It was no different than somebody washing their hands and feeling better about it.
Right.
Mine was much bigger.
Hey, Ethan, do you know that the EMT called me? Do you know this?
No, I know they called my dad.
Yeah, and then your dad put me on the call, and I'm trying to convince this guy not to scan you. And this guy said, "Do you realize what the symptoms he's presenting with?" I said, "He's a goddamn good, he's a good actor. He should get an Oscar for this one." But I have to tell you, this is made up, right? And so it was a very funny conversation because the guy was like, it's the protocol. And I said, well, just so you know, he knows that's the protocol. So everything he's doing, he knows exactly what you're going to have to do because of it. Can you let the hospital know that, this is someone who has a pattern of doing those behaviors, and that the chances of him, can he be observed before he goes ahead? And the guy said, well, he's going to walk in there and they're going to scan him. And I said, well, you're going to make him, short-term happy, but sicker in the long run. And I think that's kind of like where, the system is not prepared for someone like you. You know how to play the system. Right. And the OCD was using your ability, intelligence, and talent to protect itself and continue perpetuating your condition, right? So contingencies for you were really important. So, even when you're saying about the chicken, you weren't eating, and if you didn't open your mouth, it was gonna poke you. You had to have consequences for not opening your mouth, So yeah, I don't know what the HIPAA laws would say about that. Well, HIPAA laws isn't about chicken, it's about, portability of information. But the information here is that, your OCD could not in needed contingencies. And what Jason did with the security people and all that, sometimes we have to resort to very unpopular measures. Yeah. And that's why it becomes very difficult, because if you're worried about your reviews and how people are going to look at you and what you're doing, you will never do the right thing. You have to have the courage to say, I'm here to save a life. I'm here to fight this fight, and I have to be less scared than you were, right? And I think that's what this team did. And I think, I'd love to hear from Nate too about, because I remember Nate, when we talked a lot as he transitioned and needed like a different perspective, because the intervention was kind of my job, the skill training was Jason's job. And then he needed a different approach to actually find a future. And Nate was so good at that.
I was going to set up Nate. So my question is, I pull this ridiculous stunt. I'm getting kicked out. At this point, there's no way I'm staying at the OCDI. A, why didn't you give up on me? And two, did you throw Nate to the wolves?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking Jason and Katya, but I'm teeing you up.
So the question was,
why did you not give up on me at this point?
Because you were, like I said, you were doing some exposures and putting on a good show, but you weren't really fully embracing the treatment or being honest about how much you were suffering. That thing that we did was something we were having fun with. You were scared to do it, but we were having fun. We were together in the process, and it freaked you out. And that's why I called security, because you wouldn't leave my door, wouldn't leave my office. because he was trying to get reassurance. But I knew even then you had, you were supposed to get a haircut after that by yourself, like walk down to the center and get your haircut. That's because we knew what you were capable of, but you were really having a hard time coming to terms with it and just going for it. So I didn't feel, even though you ended up being kicked out of the program, I didn't feel like you were backsliding or like you weren't going to get better. We were seeing, like we were uncovering the real OCD where you could not hide anymore. You couldn't tell us a story and you couldn't cajole us into doing something other than the treatment. So we had sort of cornered you or cornered the OCD, and that's why it felt right for us to keep working together, and it was a big deal for you to stay in Boston.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with no one but us initially supporting you. But yeah, I felt like that made so much sense, and Katya's confidence, from the very beginning, it just sort of influenced all of us. And Nate was really the perfect pick to help when you were up in Boston, because you, in my opinion, you'd gotten to a place where you had started using ERP against your treaters, where you could sort of wield it as like, look what I'm doing, and like keep everyone from getting to the real scary stuff that was still torturing you. And Nate had some good insight into that and how to do treatment without it being someone checking the boxes of like, I did this thing, really helping someone come around to what they want. Well, I'll let Nate explain, but
well, let's tee this up. And for those of you that ask questions, I know we're running long, and I sincerely apologize. If you don't listen to anything, listen to this, because we've talked over the course of the last year for, on live streams, and the number one thing we talk about is, how do you shift? How do you buy into treatment? How do you do it? How do you get better? And like, for me, everything that I learned with Dr. Moritz and Dr. Elias were all necessary foundation for what I did with Nate. But if you hear me talk and I say it in my keynote, the things that I learned with Nate completely changed my life and completely changed the way I approached ERP. And so for those of you that are stuck, for those of you that feel like treatment doesn't work, for those of you that don't feel like there's help, or that you're struggling to shift, or whatever it is, listen to this, because this is what I want you to hear. So teeing off, Jason. So long story short, I did this stunt where I went to the hospital and got scanned, and so I was told I had to stay in Boston and find an apartment and live on my own, and that I couldn't have any contact with my parents at all, and that I had to create a new life in Boston. And they sold my car and my furniture. And for somebody that was scared to be away from his family, when you tell somebody that they can no longer see their parents again, sure, I'm 32 on the outside, but I'm emotionally 5 years old. So when you tell a 5-year-old you got kids see your parents again, it was literally the scariest thing imaginable. And to Jason's point, when he said we stripped everything away to get to it, the corner that I was backed into was I had to face treatment because I had no other options. They used my OCD against me. They used never seeing my parents against me, which was the thing at that time I valued most, other than my own life. And so I could either run and risk losing everything, or face it. But it was the scariest thing I ever had to do. So the first thing I had to face was Nate. But Nate, so what was your game plan going into this?
Katya and Jason really set it up beautifully. And as I was thinking about this while they were talking, I realized I learned how to treat people like you working with you. So I just have to thank you for that. When we started working together, do you remember, Ethan, when we were sitting in that office and I was this like fresh hotshot guy who had just got out of grad school, and I was going to teach you all these DBT and ACT skills, and I remember I had the books out and I was like going through all of them with you. And then I realized something. You weren't that interested in learning the skills. You really just, at the beginning, you really just wanted to talk about going back to Florida, and you needed your parents, and nothing was going to help you. And I just kept doubling down, trying to teach you more skills, teaching more skills. and you'd end up on the floor crying, just like you did with Jason and Katya. I felt overwhelmed. I felt frustrated, but I stuck with it. I was reaching out to Jason a lot, who was kind of supervising me at the time. And then the shift that happened for me was, you're living in this apartment in Boston. You're totally lonely. You're totally depressed. You're totally frustrated. And you had this moment where you texted me for help and you said, I just posted on my ex-girlfriend's Facebook and she's not responding. And now I'm feeling really bad. And now I want to hit myself in the head. In fact, I think I hit myself in the head. And you started obsessing about that. And I usually would have focused a lot on your symptoms and done an exposure with you around that. But instead, I shifted you back to, you're feeling sad. Well, let's talk about that. What's going on? And we started to uncover that you actually wanted a girlfriend and that you were feeling lonely and that you had no connections in your life. And we started pushing towards you getting out and dating and making friends and getting a job. But the point that a lot of, I think, therapists get stuck with someone like you, where I got stuck initially, was I got to focus on his symptoms. This guy's hitting his head and I got to do an exposure for that. But instead of going ERP with you, I went more in that ACT direction where we focus more on opening up to what you're feeling in the moment, getting in touch with what you were really feeling, which was, I want more connection in my life right now. And I think Jason was right when he said this before. A lot of your hitting your head stuff was distracting from other stuff that was going on in your life, which was, you didn't have a good sense of who you were. Your acting skills are so good, but it pulls you away from what you really want. And I think it was hard for you to be fully authentic in relationships at the time. So as you started dating and getting a job and making friends, I would use the DBT and ACT skills to help you do that stuff. And I actually think the OCD started taking care of itself. In fact, the more Jason and I ignored your OCD symptoms, the more they decreased. So this was a case where focusing on ERP, I think, was actually making you worse.
Sorry, I had to get emotional for a few different reasons. Hearing you recount, me talking about being afraid, just the words that you used, I felt bad for that guy. But also the fact that, like, on Friday I moved in with the person that I love. We're 10 years later, and I hear you talking about all I wanted was connection in a relationship, and and I have that. It's just kind of poignant. So I've people have seen me very publicly these last 9 years advocating, or 8 years advocating, and I guess I've talked a lot about professional and things like that. But life is full, and Dr. Moritz told me that early on. It's not about joy; it's about living a full life, and a full life has bad, good, great, sad, all the things in between, and just that well-roundedness, and that's really the goal here. But to your point, yeah, and I remember I met someone, like, I was so lonely, and I remember, like, it was weird. All I wanted was a hug, and I talked about that earlier. But I'd been at the OCDI, I'd been at NBI, I'd been away from my parents. I think at that point it had been 3 or 4 months since anybody touched me, and I'm not talking sexually. I just mean human touch. And, like, all I wanted was to feel connection in some way, shape, or form. And I was starving for it. And I'd already decided that I didn't want to die. That was in the first 6 days. And I wanted to at least face things head on, even though I really didn't know what I was doing. The only other shift moment, and I talk about this in the keynote, was this willingness, the insight and objectivity to recognize that the only way I was going to get better was to be willing to let my biggest fears happen. Yes. That was for me the biggest key. Was I finally realized, if I'm going to get through this, then all of my fear, I have to be willing to let all my fears come true.
Right.
Like, there is no CAT scan. I'm just going to bleed to death and die. There is no doctor. I'm just going to vomit on the floor till whatever the fear was, it just needed to happen if it was going to happen, because there was no other way through, because I just couldn't. I was in so much pain. So much pain, and I was suffering and struggling so much. Nothing else worked. So it was just like, I finally realized, I'm like, oh, well, I guess this is the only way, because I've exhausted my resources, which were basically what OCD wanted me to do. And now it was like I could either face it the way I was being told to face it or not. But I remember telling you guys that I met a girl, and the first thing I did before I even had a job was, I went on JDate. This is before apps. Tinder wasn't around. It was much harder to meet women online. And who wouldn't want to meet a guy that was fresh out of the OCD Institute, crippled with OCD? Like, that's a dream. So I also question, like, where that takes like some moxie to, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I moved out to LA and I was terrified to ask girls out. Here I am, like, living in a rundown piece of crap for like $400 a month. I had a kitchen, a bed, and a sofa all in the same room. And I'm like, I'm meeting someone. I'm Jewish. I'm 33 years old. I'm an actor, professional actor. But I remember us talking about the girlfriend, and Katya didn't think it was a good idea.
I have that in my notes, by the way, that Katya was nervous about it at first. And it's crazy that Jason and I were encouraging you to date after you were lying in a snowbank faking.
Yeah.
But that was one of those risks that I felt like I needed to take, because everything else I was doing with you was making you worse, focusing on your symptoms.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning for everyone listening, your symptoms worked really well with this. And I think in general, there is a way of encountering exposures naturalistically and taking them as they come and not doing rituals. But I have to say, with anything that's like constant monitoring of something or checking, having distractions is an exposure. Like, if you're turning your back on the stove and you can't see if it's boiling over or it's all aflame, that's a good strength exercise for someone with that kind of OCD. And so for Ethan to be on a date or at a job or anything that was going to interfere with his ability to pay attention to his health or to his head in particular for a head injury, that is a form of exposure. So it wasn't like, I don't want it to sound like it was easy for you or that it didn't have an exposure element, that it was excruciating for you. You called us from Guitar Center crying during your shifts and because you were just so scared and upset.
Right, but life is the biggest exposure,
Yeah.
right? And I think that the idea that we do the formal base of the therapy, Ethan had to feel stripped of everything to be able to rebuild it, right? And I would say that my concern is if he got a girlfriend that was enabling him, everything that we stripped him for, it would come back and he would actually depend on her or in this person. And then we would have to start from scratch. And so, luckily the outcome, I don't think was exactly that, but that is the danger in terms of, the intervention. For someone to open their eyes, we have to take out the glue first, right? And that painful scraping of the glue allows someone to open the eyes, and now you have the world, and now you have to learn to engage in the world. And I think Nate 100% agree with you that Ethan, we talked about this, and I remember the three of us, I even remember what I was when we were talking. It was like, he has all the skills. He already got all the therapy. Now it's about applying it to life. Let's not continue giving him skill, and so I think that, specifically to others that are listening, the treatment is not just like a cookie cutter, one size fits all. The timing is so important. I think that if we started Ethan on ACT and then trying to find the reasons to find a girlfriend in life while he was living at his parents' house, there would have been no way that he would listen, because, I actually checked back on my notes and there were so many conversations about a life worth living, what you do, and that was like completely ignored. That time you're not ready to hear any of it. And I think that it was, so well done by Nate that he perceived the timing so right. And you say, well, I was new to the whole thing, but you were very perceptive that he was ready to take that next step. And the next step is to, hey, you have your skills. When you're a baseball player, you're not practicing in the game. You have to play the game. But in order to play the game, you have to practice first. He had enough practice. It was time to play the game.
And just to add to that, when you started dating this girl, I've looked back at my notes, your symptoms shifted from head hitting to, does she really love me? Do I love her? Oh, she doesn't like sleeping in the same bed together. Oh, all different kinds of things. But here's what was different. You were motivated to work on that because you wanted a girlfriend. And it was a much different experience than working on the head hitting. You really wanted to use skills to work through that.
Yeah. And there's so much I remember about that period of time. The ACT skills, acceptance commitment therapy, which if you aren't sure what that is, we did some amazing town halls, 3 town halls, in fact, around acceptance commitment therapy. So I urge you to watch. Was really game changing for me. And, the beautiful thing about ACT is you don't need a mental illness to benefit from its precepts. Like, it's just an amazing therapy overall, just as an approach to life. But I mean, the things that I took away during that period of time that really, influence my day-to-day now is this idea that I remember I got a job at Guitar Center because I needed to get a job. I feel I'm still bitter that I got left in a city with more colleges than anyone else, because getting a job in the middle of the 2008 crash, where there's like Harvard and Berkeley and Emerson and Boston College, everybody had jobs. I couldn't get a job. So I got a job at Guitar Center. And I just remember calling Nate and saying, I can't go today. I can't work. It was very early on. He's like, well, why not? I said, because I don't feel good. And I was crying. He's like, well, why can't you go crying? And I was like, well, I can't. He's like, but why can't you? And I said, well, I mean, I could, but I don't want to. He's like, well, why can't you go cry? And he kept reinforcing this idea of, can't you go anyway and just cry or be however you are? And in my mind, it was so rigid. It was like, well, no, it's professional. It's this. You know what? I got on a bus crying. I got to work crying. I hid in the bathroom, cried. I would work a little bit outside, then go back to the bathroom and cry some more and text Nate and go back out. And, but it really hit me that you can do value-driven actions, and it doesn't matter how you feel. And I've talked about that so many times, but this is where sort of the birth of that was for me, this understanding that, again, you don't have to feel good to do meaningful things, how important it is to do value-driven actions, and how, because, if I'd have laid in bed all day, that just reinforces the negative behavior and the avoidance. But every day I went to bed, I may have had an absolutely horrific day. But in my mind, it was like, but you went and you did it. And yeah, you cried and it was messy and it was ugly and it was dirty, but you still did it. And so maybe I wasn't great at it the next day or the next week or the next month, but eventually all of that starts to pile up until growth becomes exponential. And that's what started to happen for me, is suddenly I didn't even realize it. It's sort of like you have that pain and you want to go to the doctor and you're like, well, and you notice it for 3 or 4 days. And then about a week later, you realize that you don't have the pain anymore and you're not sure when it went away. This was like one day I just wasn't trying as hard to live life. I was just living it. And I didn't remember exactly when that happened. It just started to happen and I started moving toward everything. But the other thing that I learned, and to this day it still amazes me, was the fact that you can have a great day and feel terrible at the same time. That was something completely new to me. And it's something that I am grateful for and appreciate every single day of my life, is that I can feel terrible. I can actually be sick. I can have a terrible headache or be nauseous and have the best day possible. That the experience is not defined by the feelings and the emotions. And it's such a game-changing way to approach life. And by the way, I'm not perfect at this. I have bad days. I have bad moods. I'm annoying. I'm moody. I'm irritating. I'm all that stuff. I am by no means perfect. But this concept that feeling doesn't dictate the value of a day, and being able to have and experience joy alongside all the other crap. I mean, like, it's really mind-blowing. But I mean, I learned that there and I just carry that with me. I don't know. You have thoughts? Why is that so important? It's important, but go ahead, Nate.
Well, I just remember, I was thinking of Jason on this. Jason, I don't know if you remember the morning where I came in and I think you had just had your first kid and you hadn't slept the entire night and you had patients for the entire day. And I said, oh shit, like, do you want me to like cover for you or do anything? And Jason said something like, no, this will be a good time for me to practice ACT. Like, to really go in with the sense of like, what's it like to feel tired and still fully engage in my life? And yeah, I think Jason and I joke around about that stuff, but we really do live that, where sort of you invite in this discomfort and you learn from it and you grow from it. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I think that the learning process and the practice of life, and just, Ethan was welcome to the world of the regular people. We all live with the uncertainty.
Yeah.
We all don't know what's going to happen next. So Ethan just became part of the world of the regular people, like us, like everyone here, which is, hey, nobody is entitled to have certainty, and no one is entitled to feel good, and no one is entitled to always do what they want to do and how they want to do it. And that reality is beautiful. It's not actually harsh. It's like, it is what it is. Life is this way, and there will be days that are going to be tough, but guess what? You have to get through it, right? So I think, and there's a question, I think, on the thread, Ethan, about psychoanalysis, and if we could speak to that, because I think.
Yeah, I was actually going to dive into some questions real quick. But go ahead, Katya. Where do you see that? Can you read the time?
Yeah, 8:13 by Stefan Hansen.
Oh, I read that. Okay. So Stefan Hansen at 8:13 p.m. said, I read that ERP is the recommended treatment for OCD. However, in the psychoanalytic literature, I read again and again that exposure therapy can trigger psychosis. Is this really a risk, ERP? Thanks.
Yeah, so there are 11,000 papers to the benefits of ERP in psychotherapy for people with OCD. I don't know any kind of psychoanalytic research that was done on OCD. I actually was trained in psychoanalysis as my first, round of training as a psychologist, and that's the reason I moved to the U.S. is because it didn't really work for people with anxiety. Actually worked for very few conditions, and OCD is not treated by psychoanalysis. Actually, psychoanalysis is a detriment in terms of treatment modality, where people that are treated with psychoanalysis are very likely to become more ruminatory, and the patients that we have that had very, very difficult treatment outcomes are people that have received psychoanalytic treatment. There's absolutely no basis. Can someone become psychotic because they were already developing psychosis and they receive ERP like most people with OCD? The ERP and the psychosis are not connected. And they, I could say, I'm going to date myself here, but I've been seeing patients with OCD for literally 30 years and supervise many people and work with many people. That is actually a fallacy. I mean, whatever papers were written about that, I wanted to see when they were written and what it was based on, because there's absolutely no body of research in psychoanalytic treatment. Psychoanalytic treatment is not a scientific method of treatment, is a philosophy, a concept, right? So in terms of OCD, ERP is the best treatment without a doubt, but ERP is very difficult to do. When people think that ERP is just expose someone to their fear stimuli and they're going to get better, I think that this presentation is exactly to illustrate that that's not the case. Ethan had been exposed hundreds of times to the stimuli. He had every skill possible. He could give you a lecture on how ERP works, what he had to do. And he couldn't turn that key. He couldn't actually, take that leap of faith. And so ERP alone as a modality of treatment, not even is not effective, but it needs a very big conceptualization of the case. And it's really, really complex. And time again, like even when we're doing, our postdoctoral residency for 2 years, and you guys know that from IOCDI, right? That it's still very difficult to even teach, and we ourselves have to be humble about it, because ERP is not ERP, like, oh, just expose. It's really complex. We think about it every day. Every step of Ethan's treatment, since we're talking about you, right, Ethan, was thought out in terms of how do you do the exposures, what is it targeting, how to target, and I think that that's really important. In terms of treatment, it's not just a name, it's actually a whole structure with so many layers, and it's pretty hard to do.
It is. Yeah, we've worked with so many people that have a dual diagnosis with psychotic symptoms and OCD, and you can still treat their OCD. So it's,
Absolutely.
I mean, there's just lots of misconceptions, lots of data out there that says this is not a risky treatment. And despite how that video looks, it was a brief clip where it looks like, we always say you can't do this treatment to someone. They have to be involved and try it for themselves. But there are these steps along the way where you have to stand up for this person and like almost come to their defense against the OCD by pushing the envelope of some of these exposures. But the patient can always say no, and you're always sort of like, you're laying it out there for somebody what you're doing, even if there's lots of uncertainty involved. So yeah, you have to be a part of it, and that's really what Ethan did when he decided to get a job, and like, so rather than sit in that apartment in Boston, pulled your life together. That was you engaging treatment really fully for the first time.
I don't think I gave myself credit for about 3 or 4 years where I didn't feel like I ever shifted on my own. I felt like I was put in that position. I couldn't choose it. I didn't choose it. I saw so many people at the OCDI get better. And in my mind, I couldn't do that. I had to be put in an even more dire situation. And therefore, like, I never gave myself credit. I always felt like, oh, well, I was just put in that position and it was all of you. And after about 3 or 4 years, I sort of saw it differently, and now I'm the shit, and thank you guys for a little bit of help. No, I'm kidding. I do want to make a public service announcement, which is simply like, because I remember when I told my story, I get a lot of questions. So like, what we're talking about now it was very specific and thought out and systematic for my own presentation of what OCD looked like in my journey, and the decisions were all based on previous actions and previous decisions. So if you're on here and you're watching, and I'm already reading comments, we're at a loss, we don't know what to do. As Katya says, it's not a one size fits all. And it doesn't mean that the approach they took with me means that that's what your situation requires, or that you need that. You always should talk to a professional. You should always seek advice from an experienced clinician. And, it needs to be a systematic approach. Even if ERP didn't, I read some comments, ERP hasn't worked for me or whatever it is, it doesn't mean that you need to go through that path.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jason.
And it's always, sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's like fitting with like a follow-up to the psychosis question, because if someone is actively psychotic where they're paranoid, then doing exposure therapy isn't going to cause more psychosis or create psychosis, but it will stress the person out. So you have to treat things in a reasonable way where you understand the whole person. So I think that might be where some of that that sort of like folklore has been perpetuated, that if you're in the middle of a psychotic episode, then you need to be in an environment where people are not stressing you out. Whereas exposure is meant to stress you.
Right. And it, even like, there are ways to do the exposure when you have the collaboration. We even do that with people. But I want to say something about people feeling that they had ERP and it didn't work. And the funny thing is, time and time again, when we see what was done, it wasn't ERP. So just understand that manualized ERP many times is not ERP. ERP is a mix of a science and an art, and it has to be crafted, and it's actually like a sculpture. You have to make a sculpture for each person. And so, it's very important to realize, please don't feel hopeless, and you can't help how you feel, but just understand that it may be related to the kind of treatment you received. Because I can tell you, many years ago, we were trying to screen for people that were going to do surgery for OCD. And one of the criteria was that they had to have had ERP. And I will tell you that maybe 5% of the people actually had received really ERP and ERP for that condition. Also, ERP needs to have family participation. So I don't care if it's a young adult, a teenager, a young kid, family understanding and comprehension and support and knowing what to do and what not to do. If the family does not understand and if the person has no support, Ethan's support was to take away the reinforcers and the enabling and let him realize that he was responsible for his life and he could make that decision. And that's part of treatment. So I would say that in Ethan's treatment, if his parents weren't so loving that they felt that it was more important for him to try and to succeed than for them to feel good and not feel guilty, I'm not so sure if Ethan would have had the opportunity to go ahead and move on with his life. So just remember that, please, there are ways to get better, and that's what makes me sad. Sometimes people try all kinds of different treatments, not only ERP, but all kinds of treatments that people talk about, and they say, oh, it didn't work, I'm hopeless. Wait a second, but maybe it wasn't you, it was the treatment that wasn't right for you. It's not a one size fits all.
And the other thing, I changed my messaging. If you listen to my keynote, I think I say in it that ERP didn't work, ACT changed my life. And after really working closely with Liz McInvale, and us becoming dear friends, and her having advocated for so long, we were on an 8-day trip together. And I remember very distinctly having this realization. I was like, oh my God, ERP totally worked. It was me that didn't embrace the ERP. And it was such a huge realization, because suddenly, like, I firmly believe that I've never said this, and maybe I'm wrong, but I struggle. I really want to get to the bottom when somebody says they're treatment resistant. Either that there's another diagnosis going on. And again, I'm not a clinician. I don't know why I'm talking like I'm a clinician right now. I want to get to the bottom of that. But when I'm advocating as somebody like ERP doesn't work for me, I really want to investigate that, because my experience, I feel like if I get better, anybody can. And I have a very clear idea of why ERP didn't work. It was because I didn't believe it would. And so, as you heard of what I went through, all of it to make ERP work for me and against me, all this stuff, it wasn't until ACT really changed my perspective, then I started doing ERP. So I say, yes, ACT saved my life, but like, there wasn't a day during that time in Boston that I wasn't doing ERP. I was doing ERP every minute. And to this day, I do ERP every day. I just don't realize I'm necessarily doing it. And so for me, it's, yes, what Katya said about, the application of ERP, but it's also our relationship to it, and how much we're willing to surrender to the modality of treatment. And in my case, I didn't until then. And that really shifted my view of ERP. So anyway, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. Nate's comment about the story about him asking, why can't you go crying, is such a great example that our expectations of what it means that something is working is really hard to stay consistent about. So when you're in the midst of OCD, which will bend and twist and shape itself into all kinds of pretzels. So once you start working on it over here, it will start looking at uncertainty somewhere else. It's just always a moving target with many layers. And so if you're doing an exposure and expecting to feel a particular way, then you're going to be sort of like we used to say, whack-a-mole, where you're not going to give it enough time, or you're going to lose faith when you know if it's working if you haven't done a ritual, basically. And if you think you've not done a ritual and then you've slipped into something else, like a mental review or something, just catching that and getting back on track, like that's when it's working. And the relief you get, where the symptoms have gone away, or you feel more at peace with things, that's all going to happen. But that's not the evidence of whether or not it's working, because that sometimes doesn't happen for a while, or it happens in these small doses that you can't really, with so much strong fear, you need like a therapist who's been seeing you for a few months to be able to show you, when we first met, this was the thing that was really, going to send you screaming out of my office. And now, like, that's not a big deal. Like, you have to have people remind you of these things, because it's hard all the way through the process. And so it's easy to forget and think, oh, this isn't working, when you're probably making progress that you can't see.
And one little story about you, Ethan, is that, many years later, when you came to the Utah camp with the teenagers and their families that we worked, that 10 families were, and you came as our kind of like motivational speaker and guest. And then you were pulled from the back of the buoy and you flew up in the air and crashed in the water. And that was like, actually, you said at the end that actually is what onsetted your symptoms, which was the fear that would happen, because that's what happened to the friend that had the brain bleed, right? And so that's the proof. That the proof is in the pudding. You came into the boat. You told us that you're not gonna believe this is now thinking about my friend. He had like a accident behind the boat and he hit his head on right, on the board. And Ethan, literally, I have the video, and I have it in slow motion with the sound and everything, and
Oh my gosh.
boom, hit the head on the water, right? And he comes in and he's laughing, and we were like laughing hysterically about the whole thing because it was just such a funny moment and a cool moment, right? And that shows to me the power of all the work that you had done, where all the exposures that you did, including the one that got you to be kicked out of IOCDI, it actually allowed you to stay present in the moment of you on a boat with a bunch of kids that you were mentoring and talking to, and everybody was having such a great time, and you didn't leave, you didn't go to the hospital, you didn't get checked, you were just laughing and enjoying the moment, although a little scary because you did have a funky moment where you really flew up in the air.
Well, that morning I woke up with a nosebleed, and I hadn't had a nosebleed since I was 9, and I was like, holy crap. And like my logic was like, you're at 10,000 feet, it's really dry air. And I remember one of the people there like, dude, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'll just go about my day, and if I die, I die. And, you know, I didn't. But to Jason's point, and I know we're over time, we're going to wrap up very shortly. I sincerely apologize if we didn't get to questions. And I'll give out my email, and if anybody has questions or want to even just copy and paste into an email and email it to me, if you have a question for me or any of the individuals on the panelists, I'll make sure they get it, and we'll get your answer to you. But to follow up on Jason's comment that he said earlier, which is so important, that's why, to Jason's point, feelings can't be a barometer for success, is because, you know, your feelings, especially around OCD, are mischievous. So if you do something and you experience a good feeling afterwards, that's gravy. That's a bonus. If you feel better after doing it, awesome. But you may not feel better for a day, week, month, or even a year, but that's why it can't be a barometer. Now, it doesn't mean, I remember Katya saying your feelings don't matter, you know, and like, doesn't mean that your feelings aren't valid. Your feelings are valid, but are they a barometer for success? You know, if I did this for a week and I don't feel good, does that mean that I'm not getting better? No, your feelings are not a barometer of success. So you can't make it about your feelings, because they'll lie. It's, you know, and a lot of people struggle with emotional reasoning, which is this feeling that if I feel it, it must be true, whatever it is.
And also in OCD, feeling bad is the path to feeling good. So you have to go through the feeling bad to feel good. So if you feel bad with ERP, that doesn't mean it's not working. It's actually you're on the right track. You know, it is a helpful thing, right? So the same way as we say, like, someone with cancer, unfortunately, through chemotherapy, they throw up. That doesn't mean the chemotherapy is not working. That means that the chemotherapy is difficult and is challenging, but it has aspects of it that you have to tolerate in order to get to your goal, which is a healthy life, cancer-free. So to me, I think that the understanding of the tolerance of the not feeling good, you know, it's actually a good indicator that you may be on the right track, that by not feeling it. So for instance, my things on my wall are a little crooked. If you're not feeling good about that, you know, nobody should go and fix it to make you feel like the background is perfect. You know, feel bad. Feeling bad is okay. We feel bad all the time, and welcome to the world of the people that feel bad, because all of us do. And the concept that we need to feel good is something that is unsustainable.
That's right. And it makes more room for feeling proud of yourself for doing something that's difficult, and knowing all the people that would admire you if they knew what you were going through. And people don't see OCD always. You can conceal it sometimes depending on the symptom, but I truly admire anybody who's trying to push back against their OCD. It's very hard work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to answer one question, and we're going a little bit over. If everybody's okay, I already checked with Jess. I want to get to one question, and then I want to give everybody an outro. But Carissa at 7:42 p.m. wrote, "I've also grown up with OCD, calling the shots." At 7:42 p.m. I said 7:14, which isn't a time, I don't think.
I thought I heard that.
It's probably a head injury. I've also grown up with OCD, calling the shots. Just started daily ERP. My OCD keeps psyching me out because of the bigger future exposures, things I've avoided my whole life. How do you keep going? Great question. Like, I see, I laugh because people like Ethan, you know so much. I literally, everything that I've talked about for the last 7 years, I've stolen from them and taken as my own. And that's the truth. All their insight and wisdom is theirs and a few other people, and then I've just claimed it as my own insight. But I can see Nate processing his thoughts on the question, and he's locking onto the word future, and because he's act based, and he's locking onto future. And if I channel my inner Nate, the first thing he would tell you is about being present in your experiences and maybe not worrying so much about what's coming up in the future, but staying present and mindful and then I'm saying stuttering for some reason. And then Katya, I love everybody's thought. Katya is probably going to say, well, how has OCD been working for you so far? And is it worth? I don't know. I'm rambling. Nate, talk for yourself.
No, you're on the right track. I said this in the ACT skills seminar we did back over the summer, but I think of ERP as a time to practice being the person you really want to be in the face of the things that you're afraid of. So I don't think about it as like you're doing it for something in the future. I think about it more like you're doing it for right now. Like, what matters to me right now? If this is the last hour I live, like, how do I want to approach this moment? And so if you're starting to think about the future when you're doing ERP, I think it's helpful to shift back to what really matters about how I face this situation in my life right now, given that my life really is happening right now. And don't make it about a means to an end. Make ERP the end in itself.
Yeah. Chris, it sounds like you talk about anticipatory anxiety, which is I'm doing a smaller exposure now, but that makes me scared that once I get to the real deal, and as one of our, wonderful, young guys called the cracking of the nut, right? The real hard part of your exposures, maybe, that would actually be too hard. And I've been avoiding my whole life. But what's so interesting is that as you approach that in the right pace, and you learn with your clinician what to do next, that big future exposures, the thing you avoid your whole life, becomes smaller and smaller and becomes easier and easier to get to. And many times by the time you get to the big things, they're not big anymore. So allow the process to be organic and allow people to guide you, because it's really interesting. One of my patients that struggled with not touching things from the floor and really was homebound for a long time. One day when we got to the touching things from the floor, she was so mad because she said, this is so much easier than I thought. I spent so much time worrying about this. This is it. I'm not going to feel anything else, So allow this process. It's a beautiful process of growth. And it's a process that is going to be with you for the rest of your life. And it's going to define you as a person. It's going to give you the courage to face other things in life that are not OCD based, and it's going to make you who you are. So actually embrace this with open arms and don't try to predict how it's going to be, because we don't want to know anything in life. Live with the uncertainty that you don't know what's going to happen once you get there, and you don't know where there is, because you don't know if that's the big thing that you're going to do. Maybe something bigger that you want more is going to be ahead.
Mount Everest is only tall from the bottom.
Exactly.
3/4 of the way up, it's not quite so high. I just made it up. So with that, I want to pose to each of you a question. So, a lot of people that we've talked to with COVID, everything else, obviously people are desperately searching for therapy and treatment. People are in treatment. In your own practices and your own clinicians, what in your mind is, and I know there's not just one thing, but what is the key to managing OCD and making treatment really work for the individual? What piece of advice do you have if somebody's walking into treatment and you could give them something to take with them as they embark on this venture to really get things under control? What would it be? I'll start with Nate.
I think getting clear about who you really are and what you really want in your life, and then channeling all of the anxiety that you have about the thing you're afraid of towards what it is that you really want. And I think once you start to get clear about where you want to channel that anxiety and that energy that's inside of you, you can actually use it to your advantage to start pushing yourself to do the things you really care about. So instead of making ERP like a mechanism, like a thing that you're doing to get something, make it like a thing that shifts your whole approach to how you deal with your emotions.
See what I was talking about his hands, though? I mean, I'm not detracting from what he was saying, but when you can't hear him and you just see this from across the OCDI and you're really like mesmerized by him. Katya, thoughts?
Well, never give up. Don't let your therapist give up. You never give up. People do get better. There are very few people I've encountered in my career that didn't get better. And the reason it didn't get better is not because the treatment didn't work, is because they didn't work with the treatment, right? They decided not to work with the treatment. And so to me, people will get better. The most severe cases do get better. And you know, when we define success in life, we define what it better looks like, right? And so to me is never give up. Never stop searching for the right things that they're going to work for you. And don't buy into this concept that you're different, because that's a great OCD trick to make you feel like you can't get better, right? So remember, you have a tricky brain, and tricky brains like to trick you. So you have to out-trick the brain, right? And you have to have courage. And I always talk about courage. I think us as clinicians, we model courage. We have to be courageous. We can't be afraid. I can't be afraid that Ethan is going to be upset with me, or this one is going to be upset with me. We have to have the courage to push through, because you're fighting a big fight. And when you're fighting a big fight, you can't just be afraid of what people think and how they're going to perceive. You have to have courage. So I actually wish you a lot of courage.
Jason.
That's beautiful.
I agree.
Yeah, I would love it if people could see their lives as more inspirational than they do, and that the acts of courage that they're doing all the time, before they feel confident, they're showing up with courage to do even basic things. I think that's kind of related, I think, to what's already been said, but I think if there's one thing, I would say participating, and honestly participating. So OCD wants you to wait, to think about it, to figure it out, to be sure. So it's always most likely going to help you reject things, rejecting ideas, rejecting feedback, and I'm not saying your therapists are right. I've been wrong many, many, many times, for sure. But what's important is that you're in the role of engaging and participating fully with ideas that might turn out to be wrong or not so helpful, but to really give it a full try without letting all those thoughts about wanting to figure it out, wanting to be sure and think about it get in the way. Because I think everyone who's been listening to this already has the skills and knowledge they need to get over OCD, but you're just so close to the problem that it really, really helps to have therapists and support to figure it out. But all of you have done hard things. All of you have moved closer to something when you weren't sure what it was yet. That is what humans do, but OCD just kind of obviously presents things as if it's just not worth that risk.
Beautifully said. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So with that, we end on a close. I really want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight and for watching and for letting me share a little bit deeper about my story. I haven't got to do that as much, and so I'm really grateful for letting me have a moment and share with you some of the ways and reasons and the people in my life that helped me get to where I am. Katya said early on, it takes a village to raise an Ethan. And it's probably still true. But regardless, I hope that all of you watching have gleaned some sense of hope and encouragement, and knowing that there are amazing people out there, and there are tons of people in our community, amazing people just changing the game, disrupting the system, amazing clinicians and providers and researchers that are really just putting their lives on the line to really make a dent in this disorder, and so everybody can get effective, affordable, accessible treatment. And so I hope you've enjoyed tonight. I want to thank Katya. I want to thank Nate. I want to thank Jason for joining us. Thank you so, so much. Quickly, if you haven't already and you want to be notified, just some usual end housekeeping, and you want to be notified about all the programming the IOCDF is having over the next month, definitely be sure to subscribe and follow on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Also, let me go ahead and give you 2 email addresses. One is info@iocdf.org. Please don't hesitate to email the IOCDF topics, ideas, but if you have questions for any of these 3 or really anything at all, please don't hesitate to email the IOCDF. You can also email me at justethan@iocdf.org. Please don't hesitate. I know I didn't get to a big Q&A today, and I apologize, and I hope you understand. But this was a very meaningful experience, and frankly cathartic for me. So thank you for letting me have this time to share with you. And please don't hesitate to email me. If you have any questions for Jason, Nate, or Katya, just shoot me an email. Let me know who you want to hear from, and I'll make sure they get it, and we'll get you a response. So with that, thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us. I think I'll see all of you next year. So have a very, very happy holidays, a great New Year's. I always say, stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels, don't let OCD off the hook. And we'll see you next year. Thanks so much.